Ready? Okay. Welcome everybody to the decision meeting of the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee's Public Safety, Transportation and Environment Subcommittee. We have our wonderful analysts here. Let me begin by thanking them sincerely for their work, not just over the session, but the work over the interim they put into crafting what I believe is a very good product of the subcommittee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jacob Cash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll be going in page number order. There's 3 documents that you have today, the decision document in white, and there are 2 additional packets of color pages. We'll be referring to them as we're going through the decision document. But we'll start with Jacob Polikoff.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, so starting on page 1, we have the judiciary. Item number 1 was originally a restriction of funds, restricting the use of $8.25 million of the judiciary's general fund appropriation for the implementation of DeWolf v. Richmond. The agency concurred with that. The House did modify it. The first House did modify it to $9.25 million, and that was adopted.
So just for ease of all this, if we could have a motion and a second, and without me asking for it moving forward, that'd be good. Thank you. Okay, all in favor? Good. Next, please.
The second is narrative requesting a report on the appointed attorney program costs utilization. The agency concurred with this and the first House adopted.
All in favor? All right.
Third, we have narrative requesting a report on the judgeship need for fiscal 2025. The agency concurred with this and the House adopted it. Yes.
All in favor? Okay.
Fourth, on page number 2, we have a narrative requesting a status report on major information technology development projects. The agency concurred with this and the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay.
Okay, fifth, we have, pardon me, narrative requesting a annual core performance measures report from the judiciary. They concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay.
Moving to page 4, for the Office of the Public Defender, we have 1 item requesting, narrative requesting a report on caseload standards, caseloads for all attorneys in OPD's tracked case types. The agency concurred with this and the House adopted it.
Actually, I believe we have a modification, I believe. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a page number first in the color packet?
So it's not in the color packet.
Okay.
It's a
Verbal? Okay,
Yeah.
I believe it's small. Can you walk us through it, please?
right. So there was some interest in adding in caseloads for core staff. So we can add that onto the end, essentially to request a similar report. You're even included in the first report for core staff caseloads.
Okay, I think we heard this loud and clear during the budget, and I think it's a good amendment. So I'm going to make the motion to modify. So I guess we're rejecting the House and modifying. Okay, with that addition. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Going to page 5, we have the Office of the Attorney General. First item is a report on the work of the Independent Investigations Division. Agency concurred, the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay.
The second is narrative requesting quarterly reports on the rollout of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. The agency concurred in part, stating they requested they not be included on the list of authors for the quarterly reports and preferred that it only said the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. The House adopted narrative, which reflects MLSC as the only author.
Everybody understand the modification? Okay, is there a motion? Okay, concurring.
Moving to page 8, we have the Office of the State Prosecutor. Recommendation from DLS was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the House adopted that.
All in favor? Okay,
Page 9, Maryland Tax Court. Recommendation from DLS to concur with the governor's allowance. House adopted same.
okay, we're concurring.
All right, the Public Service Commission begins on page 10. The DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance, and the agency concurred. However, the House adopted several color page items. The first item of narrative begins on page 11. The first item was asking for a report on procedures implemented by PSC to verify the correct versions of filings are submitted in court proceedings.
Okay, everybody understand what the House did? Is there a motion? All right, concurring?
The second item, the House adopted narrative. This is number 2, beginning on page 11 and continuing on to the top of page 12. This is narrative asking for a report on the appeals process for PSC decisions in the judicial process.
Is there a motion on the House revision or addition? Concur? Okay,
The third item, the House adopted narrative on enforcement actions taken against third-party energy suppliers. And I will turn your attention to page number 2 of the secondary green packet, the one without a cover on it. It should be the first page, which are some modifications for your consideration to the House's report. So this includes revisions to the due date, changes to the time frame for the reporting, as well as asking for a few additional items of information on jurisdiction and fine revenue.
so committee, I think what the House did is a great first step, and some of the ideas that we came up with ourselves, we've moshed them together, if you will. And I would like to move, so we're going to reject the House, and I'd like to move our amended modification. Thank you.
And then there's one other page in the other green packet, the one with the cover on it. Page number 1 for the Public Service Commission is narrative asking for a status on the reporting by PSC of complaints against utilities on their website.
Okay, is there a motion on this color page? Adopt. Okay, all in favor for adopting the color page? Thank you.
Okay. Then moving on to the Office of People's Counsel on page 14, the DLS recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The House concurred, however, there's a color page item on page number 2 of the first green packet relating to a narrative asking for a report on agency staffing.
I think we heard subcommittee from the agency itself that they are understaffed. This is different than a vacancy study. It's for them to get back to us by December 1st of what they need to actually fulfill their mission. Is there a motion on our color page? Page 2 of the larger color page document. Okay, all in favor? All right, we're adopting our color page. Thank you.
On page 15, this in the subsequent injury fund, DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
All in favor? Okay,
On page 16, in the uninsured employers fund, DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the first House adopted. Over in the main color package on page 3, there's some committee narrative for you to consider, requesting a report from the agency on whether or not they need revised fines for uninsured employers.
all in favor? All right, thank you.
On page 17 in the Workers' Compensation Commission, DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
All in favor? Concur. Okay.
On page 18 is the Chesapeake Bay overview. There's one action there to restrict funding in a number of agencies until the submission of a report on historical and projected Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. The agency concurred in part. They're willing to submit the report. They're not interested in having the funding restricted. The first House adopted this particular action.
Thank you, Senator. I'm gonna ask that we hold this for now for full committee on Friday. Thank you.
The Maryland Energy Administration begins on page number 21. The first item is to increase the turnover rate budgeted for the 10 new positions included in the budget in FY24, which is a cut of approximately $208,000 in special funds. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Just our first cut of the budget. Is there a motion concur with the House? Okay, all in favor? We're concurring.
All right, recommendation number 2 is a narrative asking for the reporting of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund accounting to be included in the budget books that DBM prepares. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay,
And then turning to page 22, the third recommendation that DLS made was narrative asking for a report on Maryland Gas Expansion Fund activities. The House rejected and adopted on page number 24, the reduction of $9.25 million in special funds.
okay, I believe we're gonna see this come back somewhere else in the budget, or it will resurface.
Yes, I
Okay,
believe that's in the full committee decisions
okay,
for the ad.
okay, just for the public watching at home, it may look like we're cutting, but we're just making sure that it's going to go to what we would like it to go to. Okay, is there a motion on the House action? All in favor? Okay,
And then recommendation number 4, turning back to page 22, is narrative on the 2 rebate programs that will be implemented through the Inflation Reduction Act. The House adopted. However, on the smaller green packet on page number 4, there is a slight modification. The italics portion at the end.
okay, looks like we would like to add greater reporting of the submissions, and this is all as we anticipate a historic level of federal funding. We want to make sure that it's actually going to where we want it to go and being utilized the way it should be utilized. Is there a motion on our slight modification to the House's narrative? All in favor? Thank you.
The Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services begins on page 25 of the white document. DLS recommended withholding funds for the results of the agency's private grants management audit. The agency concurred and the first House adopted the language.
Is there a motion? Favor? Concurring.
The second item begins on page 26. DLS recommended withholding funds for information about the grants given out for the VOCA program. The agency concurred and the first House modification begins on page 29. The House adopted language requesting 2 reports and increased the amount withheld to $1 million for the total. That continues on to page 32. There's also a color page on page 4 of the larger document. This restricts this restricts $500,000 for 2 reports and a letter for a total of $1.5 million. It also involves or includes intent to continue providing continuation funding to individual victim services providers if an executive director is not appointed and working at the agency by April 1st. The language also provides instructions on how to award funding if federal funding is reduced, allowing providers to request carrying over federal funds, and then allowing some providers to be reimbursed on a monthly basis.
Thank you, Madeline. So I think we slight differences in philosophy between the House position. Is there a motion on our color page? Or a motion on the House action and then our color page? Back on 29, it was where the House mod. Is there a second? All in favor? Okay, rejecting the House and adopting Senate's color page. Okay, thank you, Madeline.
Then to page 33 of the white document. The third and fourth items appear on this page. Item 3 is a DLS recommendation to allocate the SAP enhancement funding using the most recently available crime statistics. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Motion?
Currently, the funding is allocated based exactly as it was last year, using the violent crime statistics as the factor. However, because the UCR has not yet been published to the Department of State Police website, I have not yet been able to provide you information with how this change would impact the fiscal 24 allowance.
Madeline, have we gotten the new data yet?
No.
They're supposed to come in
During the hearing,
yesterday?
yes.
Okay. Have they let us know when we should expect that new data?
No.
And this is coming from state police, correct?
I hadn't followed up for a new date, but it
Okay.
has not been posted as of this morning when I last checked.
Okay, Deneen, can we follow up with state police on that? Thank you. Okay, in the meantime, it's trust but verify. Is there a motion here? All in favor? Okay. We have a couple more days.
The fourth item is a DLS recommendation to withhold funds from GOCPYVS, DHS, DJS, MDH, and MSDE for the annual out-of-home placements report. The agency concurred in part and asked that funds not be withheld from itself. The first House adopted the language with funding withheld from the agency.
Is there a motion? All in favor? Okay.
There are then 2 items in the second packet, leading on page 5. So this narrative requests that the budget committees be notified within 5 days of the appointment of the agency's next executive director.
I'd like us to hold this for full committee on Friday. Okay.
Then on page 6, this narrative requests information on the rape kit testing grant funds expenditures.
So we understand this color page addition. There's a current fund, would like it greater reporting from the agency on that, the spending of that fund. So to adopt the color page. All in favor? Okay. Thank you.
On page 36 in your white packet, the Maryland Department of Planning, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The House adopted that concurrence.
All in favor? Okay.
Moving to Maryland Department of Emergency Management on page 37. DLS recommended committee narrative requesting a report on the Mesonet project status and future budget and operations. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Is there much? Thank you. All in favor? Concurring.
For the Maryland Department of Veterans Affairs, DLS recommended to adopt the narrative on the Charlotte Hall Veterans Home Contractor funding, and the agency concurred and the House adopted.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I might,
Please.
this is already tomorrow morning, so we may have some more for Fridays.
Would you like to hold this item
Could
for
we
full
hold
committee?
this? Yes.
I think that's a
please.
responsible
Thank you.
decision. All right, holding page 38 for full committee. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Also for the Department of Veterans Affairs, on the smaller color page packet on page 7, there's a color page for your consideration, requesting a report on employment and apprenticeship pipelines for veterans.
I thought this was a perfect example of brainstorming in the hearing. And thank you, Senator Rosapep, for this thought here. While we have significant vacancies across state government, we should be leaning on our Department of Veterans Affairs at being a better connector. So this is a report on how they would go about doing that. Is there a motion to adopt the color page? Okay, thank you.
Moving to Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund on page 39. The first action was recommendation for committee narrative requesting a report on policy options to address the surplus decay. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay,
The additional action from the House on page 40 is committee narrative requesting a report of 10-year histories of both insured and uninsured division surpluses. And the House adopted.
I'd like to hold this for full committee on Friday if the committee doesn't object. Okay. Thank you.
And then moving to Maryland Insurance Administration on page 41. The first action is a recommendation for committee narrative requesting report on the ITS project history and future management plans. And the agency concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor? Okay, concurring.
The additional action from the House on page 42 is committee narrative requesting report evaluating the Maryland auto rate setting model and the Maryland auto insurance market. And the House adopted.
I'd like to hold this as well. If the committee doesn't object.
Then there is a color page in the first packet on page 8. This is a committee narrative requesting report on the efforts of MIA to comply with the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act.
All in favor? Okay,
And that is all.
thank you.
On page 43 of the decision document, in the Office of Administrative Hearings, DLS recommended to concur with the allowance and the agency concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor? Concurrent. Thank you, Jacob.
Moving on to the comptroller on page 44, DLS recommended a quarterly report for the integrated tax system. The agency concurred and then the first House adopted.
All in favor?
Additionally, on page 8, of the small packet, you'll find an additional item for your consideration, a narrative for the national standards on collection of unclaimed property.
Does everybody understand? Thank you. Okay. I think we're leaning on this and we should have a better understanding of how other states go about doing it. Okay.
On page 45 for the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission, DLS recommended to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
Is there a motion? All in favor? Okay, concurring.
Moving on to page 46 for the State Lottery and Gaming Control Agency, DLS recommended deleting funds budgeted for the televised lottery drawings. The agency concurred and the first House adopted.
Okay, this is our second cut. Everybody understand? Okay. Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Additionally, you'll find another item for your consideration in page 9 of the large packet for a narrative requesting monthly for the lottery to include in their monthly reports additional information on promotional play spending, parlays, the handle, the hold, and types of sports events being wagered on for mobile sports wagering.
I think having this level of detail in our monthly reports is healthy for us and recommend that we adopt the color page. Okay, adopting.
Okay, turning now to the Department of Transportation on page 47 of the white packet. The first piece of language is annual language requiring change, notification changes to the capital program. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
Is there a motion? In favor? Okay,
Item number 2 on page 48 is annual language establishing a position cap. The House modified this, as you recall during the hearing. The agency had 50 positions that they were authorized to create. They had not done that yet, so I set the position cap in the recommendation at the current level, but they needed 50 additional positions for apprenticeship. In the meantime, they've also transferred 13 firefighter positions from the military department at Martin State Airport to the Maryland Aviation Administration at BWI. So the House adoption of 9,120.5 positions recognizes those 2 additions, and that's what the House action was.
everybody understand the House action? Is there a motion? Favor? Okay,
On page 50, recommendation number 3 was language stating intent on that MDOT take an active participate actively in the regional efforts to develop mileage-based user fee. The House rejected this piece of language, as you heard during the hearing. They've already committed to engaging on the next pilot project So this was not really needed. And I kind of would agree with that.
Concur, move to concur with the House. In favor? Okay.
On page 52 then is the Office of the Secretary. The first piece of language is annual language limiting the grant and aid program to the amount budgeted. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
In favor? Okay.
On page 53, the House added a piece of narrative asking for a report on fees for low and zero emission vehicles that other states impose and what the revenues raised thereby. And that was additional House narrative.
Okay, so for folks watching at home, this has been a persistent challenge for us and we're gonna need to untangle it and figure it out over the next few years. So I think this is a smart move on behalf of the House. Is there a motion on the House narrative? In favor?
In the larger color page packet, page 10, there's a piece of narrative that was requested on bicycle and pedestrian safety coordination within the department, both within the Secretary's office and the Highway Safety Office, which is located in the Motor Vehicle Administration. So it just asks for a number of data points to be reported through with a report due by October.
In favor? Thank you.
On page 54, for the Office of Secretary Pago, annual narrative requiring notification of changes to the capital program. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
In favor? Okay, concurring.
On page 55 was some additional House narrative added, asking for a report on the ability of flexing federal dollars between highway and transit programs. There are a number of items there that would be due by September 1 of this year.
Is there a motion on the additional House action? Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
That takes us to the WMATA budget on page 57. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. However, the House adopted narrative seen on page 58. This asks for a report on the strategy for transit-oriented development inside the Capital Beltway.
Okay, concurring with the House action, all in favor? All right,
Page 59 is the WMATA capital grant. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The House adopted.
all in favor? Okay,
On pages 60 through 62 are three pieces of annual narrative related to debt service. The first and the third one establish debt limits. The second item establishes a requirement to report on non-traditional debt. The House or the agency concurred with all three pieces and the House adopted all three pieces.
all right, let's do a motion for all three to save some time. All in favor? All right,
That takes us over to page 63 for the State Highway Administration. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The House adopted that. However, you have on the big packet, color packet, page 11, some narrative requesting a report on the efforts to increase the mowing and litter cleanup that was talked about during the hearing, and say what the outcomes are, what the costs are, and how they plan to continue.
okay, so all in favor? Okay, just for if MDOT is watching at home or SHA is watching at home, this is what happens when you do something well. We want to see how you can continue to do it well. So, okay,
On page 64 is the SHA capital program. The recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred, the House adopted.
all in favor? Okay,
On pages 65 and 66 for the Port Administration operating and capital, recommendations were both to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
all in favor? Okay,
On page 67, the Motor Vehicle Administration, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
all in favor? Okay,
On page 68, MVA Capital Program, DLS recommended concurring. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
in favor? Okay,
On page 69, the Maryland Transit Administration, DLS recommended adding language restricting funds pending bi-monthly status reports on the Purple Line Light Rail project. This is an extension of a requirement they had this year to just continue to provide those reports. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
In favor? Okay,
There is also a color page item for your consideration. This is page 12 on the larger packet, the one with the cover page. So this piece of language restricts funding from both the Transit Administration and the Secretary's office. And it is requiring the agency to submit a report on incidences where the buses, the MTA buses, have been late when providing service to school children going to their schools in Baltimore City. So it's an issue that we've seen, and we're asking them to look into it, provide some data for us, and get back to us by December.
is there a motion on the color page? In favor? Adopted.
Okay, and there is a second page. This is on the smaller green packet on page 9. This is narrative that is not restricting funds. And this is regarding fixed use of fixed rail transit. So just trying to get the maximum return on investment for our fixed rail infrastructure that is already existing throughout the state.
Senator Rosepep, I know you felt strongly about this. Move adopted. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. The next page, page 70, is Transit PAYGO Capital Program. DLS recommended concurring, the agency concurred, and the House adopted.
Is there a motion? All right, all in favor? Thank you.
On page 71, aviation, DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred. However, on the next page, the House adopted narrative regarding looking into the possibility of solar arrays at BWI Marshall Airport. And there is also a color page in your larger packet on page 13, which is regarding the same issue. It's about installing solar arrays at our state airports. But this is language, meaning it is restricting the funds prior to or pending the submission of the report.
I'd like us to hold this for full committee, if that's okay. Thank you.
Page 73 is Aviation PAYGO Capital Program. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
All in favor?
On page 74, the Maryland Transportation Authority. There was no DLS recommendation as the agency is non-budgeted. The agency concurred and the House adopted. However, there is a color page for your consideration. This is page 10 on the smaller packet. And this is regarding tolling at the Francis Scott Key Bridge facility in terms of vehicles that are going to the port that are going through the tolling area, but not actually crossing the bridge. So we're asking the agency to look into the procedures that they use for tolling that area and see if that is appropriate for where the vehicles are going in and going out.
Senator Solon? Okay. All in favor? All right, adopted.
Page 75 is PAYGO Capital for the Transportation Authority. DLS had no recommendation as the agency is non-budgeted. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
In favor? Okay. Thank
Alright.
you.
Page 76, Department of Natural Resources. Recommendation 1 there is to restrict $100,000 until the submission of the Chesapeake Atlantic Coastal Bay 2010 Trust Fund Annual Work and Expenditure Plans. Agency concurred in part, willing to submit the report, but not wanting the restriction. First House adopted.
Can we hold this, please? No
Recommendation
objections? Okay.
number 2 on the bottom of page 76 is for a report on Chesapeake Bay restoration spending. This is narrative. The agency concurred and the First House adopted.
In favor? Okay.
Then on color page, the large color page packet on page 14, narrative on rockfish. This is warm weather months catch and release ecological impact study.
Does everybody understand what the color page does? We want a better understanding of mortality. Okay. On favor? Okay.
And then in the smaller color page packet on page 11 is an ecological impact study of releasing pen-raised ducks.
Give folks a moment to read this one. I think there's a concern about avian flu. We heard about in Department of Ag's budget quite a bit. Is there a motion? All in favor? Thank you.
Back in your main decision document on page 78, Maryland Department of Agriculture. DLS's recommendation was to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred. However, the first house rejected that action in favor on page 79 of reducing MARBIDCO, or Maryland Agricultural Resource-Based Industry Development Corporation's appropriation by $6 million in general funds. This is attributable to the Next Generation Farmland Acquisition Program funding. So there's $10 million in the budget, reduced $6 million. And then there's another action the House took to add $6 million for the purposes of MARBIDCO's core loan programs due to the high rate interest rate environment.
And we will see that in full committee on Friday. So this is not a cut. Okay,
Right.
and I want to thank the agency for being responsive to us over the week. Is there a motion on the House action? In favor? Okay,
All right, now in your main color page packet, the big one on page 15. This is in the color page packet, page 15. Narrative on report on targeting cover crop program and other best management practice funding.
just for the committee to remember, we believe that there's going to be greater demand than supply. We want to hear about a strategy for focusing that supply. In favor? Okay, adopted. Thank you, Andrew.
On page 80 of your white packet, the first House adopted committee narrative requesting that the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operations Fund Board and MIMS submit a report on potential revenue sources to the MIMSOF.
In favor? Okay,
There's also a color page in the larger packet, the one with the cover page on page 16. This narrative requests that a report from the MIMSOF board, MIMS, and the Department of State Police be submitted on the training requirements for staff who work at the Systems Communication Center.
adopt the color page. In favor? Adopted. Thank you, Madeline.
Moving now to the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services, which is found on page 81 of the decision document, starting with administration and offices. The first action DLS recommended was to adopt committee narrative on the Justice Reinvestment Act report. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
In favor? Okay,
The second action is a report on recidivism. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
in favor? Okay,
The third recommended action is a report on contraband. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
in favor?
The fourth recommended action that DLS made was to request a report on major IT development projects. The agency disagreed, but the House adopted this action.
In favor?
On page 83, recommended action number 5 was to request correctional program participation measures, and the agency concurred and the House adopted.
In favor? Okay,
On page 17 of the larger color page packet, there's a color page for your consideration, which restricts $100,000 pending a report on the regulations for private home detention monitoring agencies.
so just as a editorial note, I'm gravely concerned of our lack of oversight and enforcement ability when it comes to these private home monitoring agencies, and I appreciate the committee adopting this restriction. In favor? Thank you.
On page 18 of that larger color page packet, oh, actually, sorry, that looks like a duplicate. On page 19 of that color page packet, there is a committee narrative report on medication-assisted treatment, which is required by statute to be up and running by July 1st. And so this report would provide a status update on that.
In favor? Adopted.
So on page 84 of the decision document, moving to the Division of Corrections, the first recommended action was to restrict $200,000 for a report on numerical hiring goals. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
In favor? Okay,
Number 2 is recommended action to restrict $100,000 for quarterly hiring and attrition reports. The agency concurred in part, but requested that the date be moved to the 25th of each month, and the House adopted that modification, which is found on page 85, continuing to page 87.
okay, I think this is a reasonable modification. There's a motion. In favor? Thank you.
The House also took an additional action on page 87, which is to request a report on inmate health care and the contract, which is transitioning this year.
All right, in favor? Concurring with the House addition.
On page 20 of the larger color page packet, there is a color page for consideration, which would request a report on correctional education program goals.
Appreciate another editorial note, appreciating that COVID really put a damper on this program, but I think we can all agree that we want to hold the department accountable for increasing participation here. So I would appreciate adoption of this color page and a report. In favor? Okay.
On page 21 of that same packet, there is requested committee narrative on housing unit windows, which have had a number of failures and issues with maintenance.
Just want to make sure. Okay, in favor? Adopted.
Page 22, this is a report on the tablet program, which the department started this year and is issuing tablets to inmates in their custody.
Okay, so we want to make sure this is being done responsibly and is not causing any harm to the inmates. So I'm going to ask for a motion to adopt. In favor? Okay.
On page 12 of the smaller color page packet, this report is on the reentry passport program and the documentation that returning citizens have access to when they're released from custody.
Okay, so this is currently a pilot program. We're asking for a report on how it can be expanded statewide. Okay, is there a motion on this color page? In favor? Thank you.
On page 13 of that same document, this is a report requesting information on how the department interacts with and treats transgender inmates.
Is there a motion? In favor? Okay, adopted.
Moving back to the decision document. Page 89. DLS recommended a report on the Division of Parole and Probation caseloads. The agency concurred and the House adopted. However, there is a color page for your consideration on page 23 of the larger packet, which adds 2 bullets requesting more information on their efforts to reduce caseload ratios and to improve vacancies.
I believe we have a lot more thinking and strategizing to do to make sure that we are approaching this strategically. And I think the Senate's additions here are going to get us a more robust report. So I move the adoption of the color page. All in favor? Okay.
On page 24 of the color page packet of that first one, also for community supervision, this is a report on the screening tools and the transition to a new screening process.
Okay. Again, I think we heard in the hearing, there's some another grave concerns over the effectiveness of that screening tool. So I think this is a healthy report. Is there a motion? Second, all in favor? Adopted.
Back to the white decision document on page 90, for the Police and Correctional Training Commissions, DLS recommended to concur with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the House adopted. However, there is a color page for your consideration on the secondary color page packet, page 15. This would restrict $500,000 of the special fund appropriation for the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission Fund to ask for a strategic plan and information on expenditures.
In favor? All right, we're going to reject the House and adopt our color page. Thank you.
Page 91 of the decision document. For the Division of Pretrial Detention and Services, DLS recommended to restrict $300,000 for a report on assaults and overtime. The agency concurred and the House adopted. However, again, there is a color page for your consideration on page 25 of the color page packet, which would also add information on mandatory overtime hours that individuals are working and how many are affected.
This is a healthy addition to what the House started. Is there a motion on, first we have to reject the House and adopt the color page, the Senate's color page. Mhm.
Capture the language requiring who's doing the overtime. So Jacob, did you do that?
We can modify that to include classifications, yes.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes,
Yes.
definitely.
Okay. So in concept with Senator Jackson's amendment, I'll go ahead and second that amendment. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
And that will be ready for the
And
next
adoption.
meeting.
Great
Motion
catch.
for adoption.
Second, in favor? All right, thank you, Senator Jackson. Good catch.
Thank you.
Okay.
On to environment.
On the main decision document, white decision document, page 93 is Department of the Environment. First recommendation there is to restrict $200,000 until the submission of the Maryland Scrap Tire Annual Report. The agency concurred in part, willing to submit the report, but not interested in the restriction. The agency, the first House adopted.
I want to make sure that we are being fair, particularly to a new administration and new secretary. So I would like us, I'm going to recommend that we cut this to $100,000 restriction. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Recommendation number 2 on the bottom, page 93 is restrict $200,000 until the submission of information about correct budgeting of personnel expenditures. The agency concurred in part, once again, willing to provide the information, but is not interested in the restriction. First House adopted.
Again, I'd like to make sure our intent is clear, but we're not overextending ourselves. So I'm going to ask that we move to $100,000 restriction instead of 200. Okay. Thank you.
The bottom of page 94, it's recommendation number 3 to restrict $100,000 until the submission of a report on revised fee structures. This is in recognition of the fact that the administration has been providing general funds to support 3 administrations within the Maryland Department of the Environment. The agency concurred in part, willing to provide the information, once again, not interested in the funding restriction. The first House did modify this particular action as shown on page 96. They restricted $100,000 once again, but then they added a number of reporting requirements, including information about a description of who pays each fee, description of how the revenue for each fee is used, and so forth. So beefed up a little bit what
Okay.
was actually there. There's an alternative color page on the primary color page packet for you guys to consider, though. This is page 27. This would be narrative instead of language. What it would do, it would take basically the DLS recommendation, it would become narrative, but it includes fines and penalties. This is not included in the House language.
So I think there's good in what the House did and there's good in what our color page has. Andrew, is there, it's probably too much for on the fly. Is there a way to combine?
Yes,
Okay.
but so couple options. If you want to go with narrative,
Mhm.
what we could do is take the Senate or the House language, convert that to narrative and add the fines and penalties to that.
How does that sound to folks? Okay, let's move it to narrative, add the House detail. So I guess the motion is to reject the House action with that verbal modification, and we'll work together before Friday to achieve it.
Mhm.
All in favor? Okay, thank you.
All right, then back in your decision document on page, bottom of page 97, it's recommendation to restrict $200,000 in each of the Maryland Department of the Environment and Maryland Department of Agriculture's agencies until the submission of information about compliance and enforcement positions. Once again, the agency concurs in part. They're okay with the submission of the reports. They just don't want the funding restriction. First House adopted this action.
Committee, again, I want to make sure we're being fair to the new administration. So I'm going to recommend that we reject the restriction. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Trust but verify. We'll see you next year.
All right, on page 100 of the decision document, there are additional First House actions. First one is narrative on an ambient air monitoring report.
I heard a motion to concur in a second. All in favor? Okay,
The second additional House action is for a text alert system for environmental accidents. This could be modified by color page in the primary packet on page 29 of the primary color page packet to add as a descriptor for the potential types of accidents, illegal discharges from wastewater treatment plants. So when you see there on the third line of the narrative in italics is a potential addition.
okay. I think, again, this is legislative process at its best. The House had a great idea. I think this language makes it even greater. Is there a motion to technically reject the House modification in favor of the Senate color page? In favor? All right.
All right, now in your primary color page packet on page 28 is a language there that would restrict funding for one of the new positions that will be coming in to address chapter 22 of 2022, the discharge permits, zombie permits, administratively continued permits. One of those positions will be restricted by this language to be used for the purpose of implementing the new general permit for discharges of stormwater associated with construction activity.
I know we've all heard about a concern of lack of enforcement, particularly from this agency. And I think restricting one pin specifically just for this new general permit is a good idea. I move the adoption of this color page. Okay,
Same packet on page 30. There's new narrative on posting of federal funding online and a report.
okay. Again, we have unprecedented federal funding coming to us. We want to make sure that we are transparent and accountable. So a motion to adopt the color page. In favor? Okay,
On page 31 of the color page packet, same one, there's narrative on the posting of permit violation supporting documents on the Open MDE website.
okay. Transparency and accountability 2.0. Is there a motion? In favor? Okay,
On page 32, the next page of that color page packet is narrative on the report on PFAS substances monitoring in publicly owned treatment works.
all in favor?
And then on page 33 of that same color page packet is narrative on intent concerning controlling authority for multi-use residential sewerage systems and permit approval report.
In favor? All right, so ends, I believe, our large,
One more.
one more,
So,
the large packet. Yes.
well, there's a secondary packet. a
Okay.
Secondary color page packet. There is a color page for your consideration on page 17.
Okay.
This is a report on dam safety program funding needed for oversight of privately owned dams. Excuse me, this came up as part of your resiliency briefing.
Committee, I am, use the term again, gravely concerned that the state has no ability to hold private dam owners accountable for what could potentially be devastating impacts on our state. Is there a second? All in favor? Okay,
Okay, moving on to the Maryland Environmental Service on page 102 of your white packet. The DLS recommendation was to adopt narrative to request that the agency continue to provide, as I have in previous years, a funding statement that goes over various aspects of their finances, their reserve balances, their projects and such things. The agency concurred and the House adopted.
is there a motion? On favor? Okay,
On page 103 of the white document, there's the Department of Juvenile Services. DLS recommended concurring with the governor's allowance. The agency concurred and the first House adopted. However, there are 3 color page items in the second of the color page packets. The first one starts on page 18. This narrative asks for DJS to report additional information on child in need of supervision cases, including a geographic breakdown.
is there a second? Thank you. On favor? Okay, adopting.
Then on page 18, this narrative asks for a report on wait times experienced by youth who are placed by DJS for out-of-home placements.
It's page 19, everybody. Are we good? In favor? Okay,
Page 20 has the third one. This narrative requests that additional offense information be included in the department's data resource guide.
In favor? Okay.
Turning now to page 104 of the white document. We have the Department of State Police. DLS recommended adding narrative on the implementation of the Workforce Diversity Action Plan or the continuation of its implementation. The report would also include some demographic information. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
In favor? Okay.
The second recommendation on page 105 is to include an annual back of the bill section requesting the 2022 Uniform Crime Report. The agency concurred and the first house adopted.
In favor? Okay, I'd like us to keep a careful eye on this though, next year, since we're still waiting on it from last year.
And now we'll turn to the page 21, the last page of the secondary color page packet. This narrative for the Department of State Police requests that the department post information on its website quarterly pertaining to applications and processing times from its licensing division.
Everybody understand? Is there a motion? In favor? Okay, thank you. Committee, I'd like to go back to page 76. I asked to hold something. I meant to ask to recommend that we reject it, which is what we did for MDE and ag. But I would like to reject the recommended cut to Department of Natural Resources for the same Chesapeake Bay report. I'd like to give the secretaries in this administration the opportunity to get us this information without restriction. Page 76, any number one, I would like us to reject that. Okay, all in favor? Yes,
Are you modifying it to narrative or just eliminating the action altogether?
it's a great question. In that case, we should go back and do MDE and ag as well. Okay, so we're rejecting the House action and modifying, Andrew, thank you, modifying page 76, action 1, modifying that to narrative. And then Andrew, we're gonna have to do the same thing with MDE and ag, if you have a page number, or I can try to find it.
Sure, so for ag would be, well, nothing for ag.
I think for ag, I'm sorry, okay.
So for MDE and the decision documents on page, well, let's see here, sorry, so page 93.
Okay.
The first recommendation, that you're restricting $100,000. Did you want to change that or you're okay with that? So
I'm trying to find the similar
holds.
hold restriction. We didn't hold it, we rejected
That's the Chesapeake Bay overview. isn't it?
overview.
Yeah, so
Thank
that would
you.
be on page 18.
Okay,
So that was a hold for full committee. You guys want to,
I would like us to, I'm gonna recommend page 18, that we reject the House action and modify the restriction to be narrative. All in favor? Okay. Andrew, we're gonna get you that report, we promise.
so just so I'm clear, there are some circumstances when you guys are rejecting the House's position and that you're going with narrative.
Mhm.
And there are some situations where you're taking the House restriction of funding and reducing the amount that's restricted.
Yes,
Okay,
and in the Chesapeake Bay, there's three agencies involved.
right.
Actually, no, you have planning, natural resources, ag, and environment,
And DBM.
and GBM. Okay. Yes.
We reject
Right.
the restriction of funding.
On 97.
So
Okay.
For number
Uh,
4,
my understanding is that was a reject.
right, so. if
So we're gonna have
that's
to
the
move
case,
that to narrative as well, right? If it's in the same, Andrew, this is what, in the same, yeah, I think it's the same issues come up twice, or the same action, looks like it appears twice here.
This particular action here is sort of annual language, but yeah, you could reject this and move this to narrative. And then that would still get that report.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. I'm gonna recommend in the subcommittee, we give the new administration a shot when it comes to things like this that I think we should move to narrative for this year with a strong recommendation to the agencies that they get us these reports on time.
So, but in terms of recommendations 1 and 2 on page 93, it's still just 100,000 restriction instead of a $200,000 restriction.
Yes, those are separate and apart from, I think, what
Okay.
we're trying to achieve with the Chesapeake Bay overview.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Okay.
On page 97 was a flat reject, or that is turning to narrative?
That's moved to narrative, my understanding.
Up, nope,
On the bottom of page 97.
we're talking about,
The
So that's
section.
2 enforcement inspection positions.
Mhm.
There's a restriction of funding in Maryland Department of Agriculture's budget and the Maryland Department of the Environment's budget.
our original motion. Jacob, could you remind me of our original motion?
The body just rejected this, but there was no replacement. So if we could
Okay,
reject and modify as narrative.
I think why don't we reject the House action and modify it from 200 to 100,000? Kind of following the other MDE actions. Does that make sense? So the only ones that we are rejecting and modifying restriction to narrative is the Chesapeake Bay overview of the 5 agencies starting on page 18. I apologize for folks following at home. Just want to make sure we're consistent in the Bay overview stuff and that we are gracious to the new administration otherwise. Andrew, does that make sense?
I think so. I just want to confirm in my
Okay.
own mind.
There's 2 actions with Chesapeake Bay that are being converted to narrative.
Okay,
The Chesapeake Bay overview, and then in the Department of Natural Resources, the $100,000 on the trust fund.
okay,
Is that correct?
yes,
And then additionally, the Department of the Environment, the House modification on page 96 is made into narrative.
on page 96.
That first-
Yeah, the
the
revised fee structures. Yes.
This is the House modification.
And then you guys
Yes.
are modifying the house to
Yes.
go to narrative.
Go to a narrative, yes.
Okay.
Okay, and on page 97,
That's reduced to 100,000.
reduced to 100,000. Okay,
So I think from my area, then that clears all the items. You have made recommendations and there are
Okay.
no more hold items, my understanding.
okay. Any other revisions to our motions that, Senator Rosepap, yes.
I didn't take a look at the mass transit language before I saw it today.
Okay,
And I've edited it.
do you have a page? Ooh, okay,
It's page 9.
of the small color
I
package.
guess of
Okay,
the small, yeah, of the small one.
okay.
So what is the efficient way for me to get this for,
Jacob?
to read what I've written, to have you redraft it and present it on Friday or?
If there's a verbal way to describe just the change, you can do that, and we can make sure specifics are handled with the proper analyst. Carrie's stepping up right now.
Okay, the essence of it, it really is, it's almost technical. I mean, it's basically saying instead of fixed transit service is limited, it says routes. It's hard to make changes in routes. I just made stuff more specific. It's basically what I did. And then I said that I added that the marginal cost of changing schedules and fares are relatively low on fixed rail transit.
Okay, I want to make sure Carrie's following along.
I mean, I can give her the piece of paper.
Okay, let's give her the piece of.
Yeah.
Okay,
But for the record, we needed.
for the record, could you read to us?
I'll read you what I wrote.
There you go,
Okay.
in full. Start at the beginning.
I'll read the whole thing.
Okay,
It is the intent of the committees that state resources for transit services yield the best possible return on investment and provide efficient, reliable, and equitable service to Marylanders. Options for modifying routes for fixed transit are limited. Read my own. Oh, but the marginal costs of changing schedules and fares are low. Given the emerging change in travel patterns accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic, the state should engage in a long-term planning effort to maximize use of existing fixed transit systems over the coming decades. The Maryland Transit Administration is therefore requested to submit a report summarizing analyses of the changing market for fixed rail and of options to maximize return on the state's fixed investment.
subcommittee, do we have questions for Senator Rosepap on his revisions?
I think you
Okay.
do too. You okay?
Okay, so is there a motion to Ad-
Adopt the color page.
Adopt the color page as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.
In favor? Okay, Carrie, let's get together. Okay, there we go. All right, any other second thoughts here? Okay, Jacob, could we go through what we've held, just so we're all on the same page with that?
Chesapeake Bay is being turned into narrative, so no hold on that anymore. MIA,
Hmm. Okay. Which page?
on page 38. Oh, sorry, it's Department of Veterans Affairs.
Veterans Affairs, we're holding per Senator Jackson's motion, okay?
MIA on page 40, or at May,
MAIF on page 40, we're holding, okay?
and then page 42 for MIA.
Okay. Might be on
Aviation Administration on 72.
72.
Was a hold.
We are holding because we have a slight disagreement and we should work it out. So I need a day or two.
Okay.
Okay.
Natural resource conversion narrative.
All I have. Okay. Importance of being thorough,
Page 13, also Aviation Commission or Administration, the same
right?
items being held.
Same item, okay. In the smaller packet, we're holding GOCPYVS, page 5. Otherwise, that's it. Okay. Any other discussion for the good of the order? Okay, Deneen, are we still uncertain on time of report out on Friday, or is that scheduled? Not scheduled. We're gonna have a long day on the floor on Friday. So for the public, to be determined, will be posted on the website when the subcommittee reports out to the full committee on Friday. All right, is there a motion to adjourn? All in favor? All right, it's last time in this room.